So when Ray asked me a month or two ago to run this panel discussion, I just couldn't have been more thrilled. I think all of us consultants in the room recognize that maximizing the client relationship is vitally important to our business, but not just our business, but the integrators that are in the room, the manufacturers and everything. So we worked and brought together some of the, I think some of the most excellent experts in the industry who have a long tenure, both from the consulting side, but also from the end user side. I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. Yeah, my name's Chad Parris. I'm the president of Security Risk Management Consultants. We are a Columbus, Ohio-based consulting firm. I was up yesterday and talked a little bit about our company very briefly. We are 30 years in business here, providing security consulting business to our clients across the United States and some international work as well. With us today, we have at my far right, Jim Francis. Jim is the president and chief consultant at LFJ Consultants. Jim has extensive experience in the security profession, spans both government and industry. He has over 35 years of diverse experience in the areas of audio countermeasures, facility vulnerability analysis, crime prevention through environmental design, distinguished person protection, counterterrorism, and high threat and security facility planning. Jim holds the professional certification of CPP from ASIS International, and he's a certified facility security officer from the U.S. Department of Defense. His educational background includes a Bachelor of Science degree in occupational education from Southern Illinois University and a Master's of Science degree in systems management from the University of California. To my immediate right is James Stroud. James is the Vice President of Technical Security at J.P. Morgan Chase. Jim has experience in physical security and information technology profession with 25 years of combined industry experience, relevant consultant experience, and the last 9 years providing dedicated counter consulting services for Microsoft Global. Currently, Jim is at J.P. Morgan Chase. Also, immediately to Jim's right is Mark Powers. Mark Powers is a seasoned corporate security professional with Caliant Farm Solutions with over 30 years of experience in the development of delivery of traditional and innovative security policies, processes, and programs for global Fortune 500 companies. He has extensive experience in supply chain, risk mitigation, and electronic security systems, as well as other physical security measures. Mark is a graduate of the Norwich University of the United States' oldest private military university and birthplace of the Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC. He began his professional career with the commission as a military intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. After leaving military service, Mark began his corporate career with Norton Systems, Inc., and subsequently Bank One, Kohler Company, Arthur Anderson, W.W. Granger, Abbott Laboratories, Kraft Foods, Miller Coors, Qualtest Pharmaceuticals, and again is at Caliant Pharma Solutions. Did I get everybody? Phil, our last one. Phil he's the Vice President and Managing Principal at DVS, a division of Ross and Barazini. Phil is CEPTED certified and has over 40 years of experience in security industry with a wide range and tenure that has included engagements in the physical and electronic security systems design, high-level consulting and threat and vulnerability assessments. During his time as managing principal at DVS, Phil has worked on a number of landmark security consulting projects, including the World Trade Center, New York Stock Exchange, Sandy Hook Schools, and Time Warner. His reputation as an out-of-the-box thinker has led to a number of truly unique security solutions, many of which have been covered by security industry publications and through speaking engagements. Here's our panel, and today we're going to talk about working with our end users, working with consultants, and how to manage our engagements. Yesterday, we got together after Will's presentation and completely reset our objectives with this. We found that what Will said in his presentations, we really thought we wanted to open this up a little bit more than just having a standard question and answer process. We actually spent about an hour together in the bar, no drinks involved, and talked about our presentation and what we wanted to say to the maximizing the process and working with consultants and even integrators. Although we're going to have a panel discussion, we also want to make sure we can open it up to any questions and answers throughout the process here as we begin to collaborate with each other here, because we talked about the connective tissue of the consultant and their engagement with the end user and what they bring to the table is they're connecting themselves to the manufacturer, the architect, the integrator, internal stakeholders, perhaps the general contractor, and other stakeholders in the organization. So I'm going to ask Mark, we talked about a little bit yesterday, this connective tissue concept. And Mark, if you could talk a little bit about some of your thoughts and your processes as you began working with a security consultant and the role they play.
I will. Thank you very much. First of all, I need to thank Ray and the entire team for this wonderful venue and event. First class, I was at Nashville last year, and I was honored to be invited back to speak, so thank you very much, Ray and the team. Second is, because I am employed, I do need to do a legal disclaimer that whatever I say here is the expressed opinions of myself and not necessarily those of my employer, so please bear with me. I've been known to say some outlandish, outrageous things that some people don't always agree with. So thank you very much.
I got the mute button here, Mark. So,
yeah, turn that off, please. So one of the things we talked about at the bar, which really struck me, was Will. And wasn't that a great presentation yesterday? Really got you thinking. So I want to thank, again, Ray for putting that on. I really never thought about the fact that the consultant in the $100 million of capital projects I've been involved with was cartilage. I never thought of it as a body part. But if you think about it, cartilage is nothing more than a buffer. And at the end of the day, the great consultants that I've teamed with were my buffer. So they buffered out all the noise from all the people that want to come talk to me because I had the money to spend. They helped me buffer out my internal people the naysayers, as I call them, or the know-it-alls. And so they were actually ended up being great partners to me. So I thought that was a great insight by Will. Never really thought of it as a body part before, but could see how it works that way.
thanks, Mark. Anybody else have any comments they want to talk about there? Jim?
Oh, yeah. I think there were some really strong points that, and I rarely make notes with these general session speakers, but I was impressed with a lot of the things that Will had to say, and some really stuck with me. Probably the one that stuck with me the most was before you do anything with that client, learn a little bit about their core business so that you'll be able to walk in understanding what brings them to the table and what their needs really might be. And also think about the fact that if you're going in to help pitch getting something done, that person you're talking to probably has to sell that internally. And so they need good information in order to make that internal sale. So learning how to help your client sell, I think, was a very important message that we got out of yesterday.
And Jim, let me add to that. One of the things when you're a consultant working for a client, if a client brings you in, they have a purpose. They've called you for a reason. That means they need your help. And the one thing that a consultant should always bear in mind are two things. One, you're there to support the client's mission, not to impose your mission. And two, you really need to look and say, how can I help this client? We have a standing philosophy within our company, and all of us kind of abide by, and that's that a consultant should never leave a client with more headaches than they started with. That's why they hired us. And if we do that, then we've done something wrong and haven't brought justice to our client or our profession.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, really, really great points there. And I think I wanted to spin off a little bit more. I think as a consultant, we tend to sometimes think we know, sometimes going into these engagements, that what the client wants, but in truly understanding the organization, their culture, trying to identify their risks, their vulnerabilities, really understanding what is their pain points. How do you do that? You know, how do you engage your client to understand that? And if anybody can, James, if you could talk a little bit about what do you look for when you're bringing a consultant in? What are some of the points? Just spinning off of what Will had talked about yesterday, you know, how do you vet that consultant to the point of understanding that he generally can gather the information that is needed to understand your corporate culture and your organizational needs?
Yeah, so the way I look at it is the consultant is the technical expert. It's the SME that you're bringing in to represent you. And if you don't provide a knowledge set that that really resonates with the core values of the company that you're representing, then it's difficult to utilize you as a representative of yourself, right? So I look for expertise. I look for what do you do in the industry? What do you do, you know, outside the industry? How do you represent yourself personally? Those are some of the key factors that I look for from my perspective.
Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Will had that great slide up with all their criteria, and some of the things we don't think about, or I've never been asked to think about, is you know, how many hours does someone donate to a community or give back? My real questions are, because I've traditionally worked at the C-suite level. It's all about what can you do for me right now? How quick can I reach out for you? So what's your work bandwidth? And those are the questions I'm going to ask, because typically behind the scenes, and I think a lot of people don't understand or know this, by the time I'm calling you in, the discussion's probably been going on for 6 months, if not a year, right? So this is all happening behind the scenes. You finally get alignment with that C-suite team that they're going to move forward. And then when they say they want to move forward, they're already asking, well, why isn't it done? So when I reach out to you, you have to understand that I'm already 6 months behind, right? And delay is not going to be possible. So when I'm working with a consultant, one of the things I'm going to look for, especially in the ingestible community, is I want to know how much time have you worked in an FDA-regulated site? Do you understand DEA regulations? How intimately familiar are you with OSHA and what we do in our business? And oh, by the way, do you understand that you're probably only going to have 14 days to install 250 cameras and put up the whole entire system, because we only shut down our operation for 14 days at a shutdown. So how creative can you be in coordinating all the parts and pieces to deliver on that? Because that's going to be the expectation that's going to be given to me from that C-suite level.
How do you work with embedded consultants versus an external consultant? How do you gauge that difference in the support they provide? So I know, James, you provided internal consulting work for Microsoft and other organizations, and talk about the external versus the internal and the unbiased perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fortunate. I got to work with Microsoft for the last 9 years as an embedded consultant. So basically, I was the person that you came to as a specifier or an integrator. I worked very heavily with Phil Aronson and his team at one time as well. So, but you know, it's really interesting because you become basically the person that is the expert for the FTE or person that's representing the company. And over 9 years, it was a trusted partnership, right? I basically ran all the security arm from a physical systems perspective, and I specified everything that went in. I developed and designed everything that went in. I handled maintenance and management of everything that was in, both from a server side and from from a head end and a field side. And as you develop that trusted relationship, you partner with other companies. I partner with a company called Atriod that provides consulting services as well, and they were great as far as providing the expertise that I didn't have from software management platforms and such like that we were dealing with in there. And it's great to leverage the result from basically an FTE-like role within the ecosystem representing the company as they need you to represent and as they feel is required.
Do you ever, have you ever worked with the integrator as a consultant? Does that work? Does it not work? I mean, you build trusted relationships with your integrator, but sometimes are they the right person to do all the design and consulting and risk assessment work for you, or is that?
I'm gonna put Phil on the spot again
Because Phil's a good guy to be put on the spot. Phil
Yeah.
might be more the exception than the rule, though, but.
So Phil and I, his company and I, we did a lot of work with Linnell. One of my first projects there was to convert Microsoft's Linnell environment from a standalone Pro I system to a complete enterprise. And Phil his team was instrumental in helping with project management and helping specify and deploy that solution, even after it took 3 restarts to get where we got. But dealing with interesting challenges throughout the projects are always fun, and sometimes they require change orders, sometimes they don't. But we got there.
Yeah, good. Mark, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, you got my head spinning on that question. That's a good question. I have reached out to integrators to help me. I think it could be a slippery slope because you have to understand they're representing their interest, right? And so you may not always get the best design, or the design may not have some flexibility if you need to bolt on other products. One of the things we talked about yesterday, and I encourage anybody to go out and find themselves a great super technician, the guy or gal that does the installation of the product. That's my best resource all the time. I actually just asked that tech, what can I do? What can be done to make this job go easier? I often hear the horror stories about undersized twisted pair wire, the wrong cabling was used, the wrong power supply was being specified, not enough backup power. So getting to know, if I was a consultant, I would literally spend my entertainment budget on getting to know great technicians who do it, install it every day, because they're probably your greatest source of information out there.
Yeah, and I totally wholeheartedly agree with you, Mark. I said oftentimes when we're involved in projects, we find that the technician who has come to deploy the system often was not involved in putting that system together. And they're the guys that are actually in the field and are the ones who are identifying the fact that how did my sales representative design this system, and why wasn't I not involved because this system either won't work or wasn't designed properly or wasn't bid properly by the security integrator. I'm going to bounce this down to Jim. Do you have an additional comment on that?
I think the underlying theme that you've heard in those two discussions is collaboration. If you come into the consulting assignment believing you're the greatest thing since sliced bread and you've got all the answers to all their problems and have a canned set of solutions, you're going to fail. It has to be a collaborative approach. It's got to be collaborative with the end user. It's got to be collaborative with the manufacturers that you're considering for implementing. It's got to ultimately be collaborative with the integrator, because if we don't all work together as a team in this process, it's going to fail. It's going to fail.
Let me just echo a couple of things from Jim and from Mark. And getting back to that connective tissue, if you will. The consultant is kind of the bridge between your client and everything else that happens outside, whether they realize it or not. And sometimes the client doesn't realize what they're asking for, what they're looking for. But you need to understand their expectations. It's very important because our expectations as consultants are one thing. Their expectations as a client are something else. They don't do what we do every day, and that's why we're there. So listening to your client, understanding where your client needs to end up. When we're all finished, where's the client? Are they where they thought they were going to be? Are they where you agreed you were going to get them? And listening to them, understanding them, partnering with them is absolutely key. And it's our responsibility as consultants to make sure that when we write those specifications and they go out for bid, and if we're empowered to review those bids and then go on to construction administration and other things, we really need to be there to defend our client, not the contractor. We're working for our client, and we should be there to support them and make sure everything that we thought was going to happen does happen. When you do that, you end up with a happy client at the end and a client who gets what they expected they were going to get.
So kicking off that initiative too, gentlemen, our consultants at the end there, talk a little bit about that process. You know, you're engaged. What are the first steps that you think are the most important steps after you've been fully engaged by your client?
I like to keep things simple. How many of you here have a favorite steakhouse? So when I walk into my favorite steakhouse, I've been there a couple of times, and guess what? They know me. And they already have some understanding of, you know, the kinds of things that I'm concerned about as I'm being served. And then as I sit down and they've greeted me and they say, how would you like your steak? And I say medium rare plus. What have we just done? We have mutually accepted an expectation. Now my steak is delivered. Guess what? It's medium rare plus. They have met my expectation. And then, as the dinner proceeds, the waiter or maybe the restaurant manager comes up to the table and says, how have you enjoyed your meal? They have followed up. Now, as I'm walking out, they say, we look forward to seeing you again. There's then establishing an expectation that this is not a one-off relationship. We want to keep this relationship going. In simple terms, folks, that's how you get your client base built.
The first question is, what's your favorite steakhouse? Mine is Frankie and Johnny's on 38th Street. But you know, expectations are really the largest thing. You know, some clients will hire us for some very simple things, and some clients will hire us for projects that may last 4, 5, 6 years. We have some projects that have gone on 10 to 12 years. And you know, when you start getting into years, people turn over, management turns over, people forget things, they don't always remember. We try to sit with our clients, and I would encourage all of you to do this. And you know, we as an organization have coined it as something, and you all may coin it as something else, but we call it day 2. You know, when we finish a project, day 1 is when all of the engineers, the architects, us, we're all leaning over our client when the building or project is turned over, and we're watching to make sure everything works right, and the integrator's there, and we're all ready to respond with a screwdriver in our hand, so to speak. But day 2 is when the client's all alone. We've all gone. And their operational people, their security folks, maybe their C-suite, is going to have one of 2 things to say. Boy, I'm glad that team was with us. Or something really ugly. And I know which side we all want to be on. So setting the client expectations very early on, way out here, maybe it's 3 years out, 4 years out, where do we want to end up? And are we going to get it perfect? No. But part of our job is to build flexibility, and because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? But when you look at where you want to land, where's that target zone? And then you come all the way back here to today and say, how do we get there? How do we negotiate? How do we work with our client? Their design team, not our design team, their architect. How many of you have had to really corral the architect over the years? I know we have. They want everything invisible. We haven't seen an invisible camera yet, have you? So, but understanding your client's expectations, making sure you hit those expectations, and rechecking that along the way. If staff turns over, if the director of security, somebody in the C-suite has changed, the budget might have changed. We had one project where the building went from 22 stories to 12 stories because of budget and a redesign. So you need to make sure you keep that target out there and keep it well documented and keep refreshing it with your client. This is where we're going. This is what we agreed to. Are we still on target? It's kind of that back check coming to the table. Is your meal okay? Is it where you thought it was going to be? And when you do that, the client feels like they're your only client. And that's what they should feel like at the end of the day.
How do you guys deal with scope creep? I mean, Phil, you were talking about a 10 or 12 year project. I mean, at some point during that project, somebody has lost the vision, right? Somebody has lost the target at some point. And how do you approach that with the end user, yet diplomatically dealing with, hey, guess what? I might need more money or additional fee services.
It's interesting. We had one project in New York that went on for 13 years. It was supposed to be 8 years. And it extended and extended. And as I said, a lot of the folks turned over. When you look at, 10, 12, 13 years, the folks who originally made decisions about what they anticipated their security program was going to be were gone. We had drive-through X-ray portals, huge drive-through X-ray portals from AS&E, that the original person who was responsible for security for this organization wanted. By the time we got to the end, the current person says, why do we have these giant X-ray things? Why are they here? We're never going to use these things. So we, as the consultant, had to go back and through our documentation and say, this is what was originally decided upon. This is what we were contracted to do. These were the specifications we wrote based on the request. And that's why it's important to make sure you have that documentation and sit with your client. You can't just say, well, that's the way it was. So we had to bring historic knowledge back, if you will. And we had to rework with that client. And we didn't get paid any more money for it, but we had to sit down and kind of re-educate them to say, this is how we got here. Now, whether or not you want to continue to operate like this and you want that program to continue to function like it was originally designed is up to you, the client. Of course, it's yours. But this is how we got here. These are some of the things you might do or might not do, or how you might employ this, and you move on from there. But you need to kind of keep hand in hand with the client because things do change. People do change and their ideas change.
And technology changes. If you have a project that goes 10, 12 years, and we've been involved in these projects that we were engaged right at the process when analog was finally going away and IP was coming. But when we were first engaged, it was still kind of analog, right? Back in the late 2000s, and you weren't quite sure which way things were going to go, and the industry was still trying to figure itself out, and all of a sudden, 5 years later, when the building is at the point where the security contractor needs to come in, that technology has changed. How have you been involved in any of that, Jim, or how have you dealt with those types of issues?
I wanted to comment one thing about what
Yes,
Phil
sir.
was talking about first. Worst project, well, not worst, because we ultimately recovered, but a very difficult project for us was halfway through, the director of security fell out of favor and was fired. So everything that person had put forward as a thought was now immediately suspect. And so everything we had to do to help recover that project was to educate the client on why those thoughts were good, even though they may not like that individual anymore. And it became a really difficult issue with that client, but fortunately we were able to recover by doing the kinds of things that Phil said, helping to educate them in the why and the where and what were the reasons that those decisions were made and how we were going to help them implement it and get it done in a workable fashion. But believe me, that's a very difficult environment to be stuck in the middle of when all of a sudden all the good work you've done now is questionable. So relative to technology changes, I guess Will talked about this. We've all fallen victim from time to time to vaporware, where the manufacturer has promised, oh yeah, the release date for this version is going to be January. I guarantee that you're going to get that in January. So you spec that knowing full well when the integrator is coming to put it in, he's not going to be doing it until March. January's the release. By God, this will all get done and work smoothly. And then you find out now the release is delayed for not only a year, but maybe for 2 years. What do? That's a very tough scramble as well. And it's not that technology advanced in the midst of your thing and you may have to rethink what you spec. It's that technology didn't advance and you were basing your spec on something that was promised to you but not delivered. And that's a difficult engagement as well.
Yeah. James, you have something?
Yeah, I relate a lot to the projects you guys are talking through as far as, sometimes it's camera design, sometimes it's software from, access control platform or such. But I also find it very difficult to run projects where it's custom software, right? Where you've asked for this visitor management platform that's going to do all these things, and their business model is to specify an application that is completely custom to you, and it's like you go through and they deliver exactly exactly what you asked for, and then, well, that doesn't really work well. And talking into scope creep, it is just so difficult to not work with an out-of-the-box software that you just, maybe you just change the headers on something, or you add a custom field here or there, but most of it's out of the box. That right there is probably the worst environment that I've found over my career of dealing with implementations is dealing with custom software and delivering against that.
Since we're sharing secret sauce, one of the things I always told my clients, I'm going to provide you custom solutions with off-the-shelf equipment. So I'm not going to be going into that situation where you're going to get a one-off package that may not be serviceable tomorrow.
Well, that's great and all until your leadership decides that, that's too bad. You're gonna deliver what they want. That's it. It comes back to the customer's always right?
And sometimes leadership's idea of security is much, much different than the internal expert and even the consultant when they feel like, well, I should put metal detectors around every door and I should be able to detect, when in reality there's processes that have to be talked through and walked through. And we had a good conversation yesterday about setting expectations and how do you do that. Phil, I know we talked about some things with in the school and higher education, or in K through 12 and private schools and so forth, about how do I set the proper expectation, not just for my internal contact, but an organization as a whole.
That's true. K through 12 schools are probably one of the most volatile environments from a consultant's perspective to work in, because there's so much input. Parents, teachers, administration, town councils, state government sometimes. And there's all the competing interests. And at the end of the day, one of the things that the consultant has to do, and this goes back to even, again, the corporate world or anywhere else that you work, is what is the mission? When we work in a school, the mission is one thing. It's education. It's about kids. That's all it is. Nothing else. Remembering and meeting the client's mission should always be number one. How you best do that is by understanding your client, where they need to end up, and offering them ideas and solutions. Many of our client engagements with respect to K through 12 schools recently have been architects bringing us in to help keep the administration from jumping off the ledge, if you will. We had one school district where the superintendent was building 2 new schools, and the architect came to us and says the superintendent wants no windows below 60 inches above grade. Well, that's going to be kind of dark. That's not an education environment that kids want to be in. That's not 21st century education. So we were brought in to help develop a program and explain how you could create a safe school, a safe environment, a responsive environment, while maintaining that education element to go with it. So kids didn't feel like they were in prison. So kids didn't feel like they had something behind them or a door slamming behind them. So meeting those expectations, really, again, understanding what your client's needs are. A really quick story that I think kind of hits this home is when we started the design and engineering for Tower 7 at the Trade Center, it was 2003. Larry Silverstein was sitting at the head of the table. For those of you who know him, Bob Dusabella was sitting where Jim is. I was sitting here. Larry looked at Bob and I and said, I'm going to give you guys carte blanche to do anything you need to do for security in my new building. Anything. I will support it, whether it's financial, physical, anything. I only have one request, just one. I have to be able to lease the space. That was the client's mission. That one statement was his mission. He says, if I can't lease the space because people don't want to come here, don't feel safe, don't feel comfortable, it looks like something out of an old movie from 1946, an Alfred Hitchcock movie, he says, I'll never lease my space. So again, it goes back to understanding, why are you there? A client brings you in for a reason. In their mind, and as Jim said, and as Chad alluded to, and Mark, it might be 6 months or a year they've thought they needed you. And they have something in the back of their mind. Sometimes they don't always tell you they have an issue or a reason. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to build a little confidence with them before you get to the real story. But you need to really look at what the client's mission is and then help them set their expectations based on what you know.
lot said, a lot going on. I wouldn't want to be a consultant, especially working with a Fortune 100 firm, 500 firm. And here's the reason why is, Will said some great things about security, but the reality of it is my profession is really not seen as a profession, right, in the internal organization. If you think about it, you're probably dealing with folks that are maintenance people, facilities people. There's really rarely a true security professional leading that organization. In my own world, there's always arguments about doors. Like, who owns the doors? I'm not going to go down and change the doors every day, and that's always been a facilities issue. So now the facilities person has got, remember that Will was talking about going around me? Well, now the facilities person's got the schlag guy talking not only to me, but to the facilities guy, and they're pushing two separate agendas, right? So now you got confusion. And I'll give you a perfect example. We're in the middle of a major renovation of a pharmaceutical plant. And all of a sudden, we broke down into an argument about doors. Do we use rolling doors, slide-up doors, fixed doors? And what was going on was everybody and their brother somebody had the ear of the engineer, someone had the ear of the facilities person, someone had the ear of director of engineering, and I have a senior vice president who says, we ain't in the door business, right? So now here's the conflict, because I have 4 senior vice presidents saying to me, you're picking the door, but my boss says, you're not picking the door. So I had to go back to my consultant who says, I don't pick doors. I'm not telling you which door to pick. So we worked together as a partnership and said, okay, how do we present to the senior executives that what's the right door? And so working together, this company I worked with loved this matrix, put everything on a chart and matrix it. And so what we did was we listed the doors here on this side. He, knowing our business, knowing exactly how we need to work, went across the top and identified all the key points we needed to cover. And then he put X's next to those doors that could fulfill or deliver. And all we did is we went to that presentation with those 5 senior vice presidents. We gave them each that little matrix and put it up on a screen like this. And they all were like, ooh, the one with all the X's, that's the door we want. Okay. And we saw, and it was done. But that was done with partnership with a consultant, understanding our business and the politics and all the stuff, the crazy that goes on in corporate America, right? And one final point, and Will said this best, and I always want to emphasize this with the folks, and it's been reiterated to me numerous times by people both in and outside the industry that have worked with me. Be careful with your time. Your time is valuable. So you need to understand who are really the real players out there who can deliver the money, because millions of dollars. Think about it. My wife is amazed because I talk about millions of dollars like it's a dollar bill, right? That's the level I play at. Oh, I got another $10 million project today. Whoop-de-doo, right? And in my mind, I know how fast we can burn through that. But there are very few people in the security industry that can deliver that project. Don't waste your time on the 90% of the people who will never, ever, ever deliver a project for you. I just feel for you when that happens. And the reason they won't do that is, and I think somebody here said it best about selling. My consultant has to help me sell it because I'm the internal salesman now. So you have to give me the right lingo, the current vernacular. Give me the right slide. Why are we doing it this way, not that way? Because understand, when I go and sell this, I'm going to tick somebody off on that executive team because somebody didn't want it that way. But I'm doing it for the good of the corporation. I'm doing it for the good of the shareholder. I'm trying to do it for the CEO. I'm trying to do it for the employee who's coming to work every day. But there are hidden agendas out there that are risky to me in my career if I go forward with this. And that's really where I depend upon the consultant to be there with that, through that process. So,
one of the other things that Will talked about was knowing your own bandwidth. The worst thing you can do is to commit to do something for a client when you don't have the inherent skill set to do it. Never be afraid to say to a client, I can't do that, but I'll find you somebody who can. And by that, you are building trust with that client, that you're being honest with them, that's not in your bandwidth, but you're going to help them along that path.
Thanks, and I want to be sensitive to our time, but I also want to leave some time for some questions from our audience here. One last thing I want to throw at the panel is dealing with conflict resolution when you have a butting of the heads or a disagreement between your consultant and your end user. What are some of the things that you have done to address that? We talked yesterday extensively about owning the process, owning your mistakes, being accountable for things that have done, and not pretending and making it go away. Does any comments about how you deal with that? If you had any personal experience with that from the end user side, when working with your consultant, and what was the resolution to that?
Yeah, I try not to, I try not to bring conflict to the customer at all if we don't have to, right? You know, you want to partner with your consultant to work through what your disagreements might be, or because everybody has their own opinion about how things should be done, right? And then it's basically laying it out and getting it on paper, doing a whiteboard, and say, okay, why is your way better than mine? I'm always open to listening to anybody that has anything to say about. Because I'm not always right, and it's just trying to map out where the commonalities are, and basically vote on the best way forward, and then you present that to the customer with your reasons why. That's the easiest way that I've found, and it works really well.
Yeah. Any comments there?
But conflict is never good, and you have to think about the solution to it. And the one example I use is the consultant has to understand at the end of the day, when the project's done, I have to live with the technician that's going to be living there complaining to me about how horrible the consultant was, right? Didn't design it properly. So when I get that feedback and I go back to the consultant, because I do want to partner with that consultant, I want to continue because there is good work, there has to be a willingness to accept that feedback from a technician, right? And make changes. And I'll give you the example we talked about at the bar was the consultant puts together a 100-page bid document, right? And that's the design and build document. How many here think that technician in the field gets that 100 pages? Right? What do they get? They get the schematic, right? The engineering drawing. Well, if you have key points in that 100 pages, why can't you make a balloon or call out on the schematic page, the print page that the tech's using? And that way, when you do your test and acceptance and it's not delivered, and the tech's going, well, I didn't see that. I don't know, right? Now you got conflict going on. Meanwhile, the CEO's on your on your butt because he wants that suite open because that's $1 million worth of product he's got to make this week. You can point out very casually and go, it's right there on the schematic. So we got to get this done. Instead of spending a week in argument about do we or not do it. So be creative with it. And that's one of the things I think helps mitigate or lower conflict.
Yeah, and that goes back a lot to Mark, some of the things we talked about too with how do I kick off a project with my integrator? Okay, now I'm the conduit from the end user to the integrator. And so that communications has to be very, very clear about here's the project, laying it out, going through the specifications, going through the drawings, spending considerable amount of time, not with the sales engineer, but the project manager and the technicians in the field that are going to be implementing this project at the end of the day and have to make this thing work.
Yeah, let me share something with everyone that we actually started doing at the kickoff of One World Trade Center. We knew One World Trade was a critical project and was going to have its share of headaches no matter what we did. We developed kind of a cheat package, if you will. We took the key points out of our specifications, as Mark was just saying, rather than ballooning them on the drawings, because we were flat out told in New York most of the time, none of the construction people will read specifications. They will truly go by drawings only. Yeah. But what we did is we actually developed a kickoff package where we sat with the CM, the electrical managers within the CM, the security integrator, even some of the manufacturers. Excuse me. And it was about 11 pages, 12 pages. And it was kind of the cheat sheet to the test. And we said, these are all of the key points at the end of the project and throughout the project that we're going to be expecting. It talked about as-built drawings. It talked about documentation. It talked about process. It talked about what are we going to do when we come out here for construction administration and start inspecting. And at One World Trade, we did 1,106 doors were involved, whether it was just a monitor door, a control door, or something else. And we sat with everyone And this wasn't just one meeting. This happened over about a month, over 2 or 3 meetings, and really went through, these are the expectations. I don't care if you didn't see the original specs when you bid the job. What I care about is what we're talking about today. And we're telling you need to go back to them, and here's all the things that we're going to ask for. Here's the answers to the test at the end. And we did that, and I have to say, we had a successful project. I believe in large part because we did that and because we partnered on day one with them and told them, here's what we're looking for. We didn't leave them in the dark, and we didn't go back and say, oh, you didn't know, you didn't look. It was our responsibility to make sure they did and not just complain when they didn't. And I think that really set a standard for that. And we've been doing that since, and that's been 10 years now.
Yeah, and I think part of the process is when you're at the end of that project and you get to that testing and commissioning phase, you don't want any gotchas. I mean, you don't want to surprise the integrator. Oh, you didn't know you had to do this? So taking them through a commissioning and preparing to commission and test that system well in advance, whether it's checklists or communications or all those things is vitally important. Jim, one more comment?
I think that's a very critical point, because at that point, it's just like the medium rare plus state. We're establishing mutually accepted expectations. They know what we're expecting, and if they have some commentary, that's the time for them to say, I can't make that, or I've got to do this a little differently than that. But then we all agree of what the final product is going to be and how it's going to be implemented and delivered.
So I want to open it up to any questions. If anybody has any questions in the audience here of our panelists.
So for Mark or Jim, it sounds like you're describing more of a time when you're hiring the consultant directly, but on a capital project where the architect might be hiring the security consultant, or even that security consultant's under the MEP team. How do you establish that direct line of communication without alienating the rest of the people in between?
Well, that's a good question, great question. I don't permit that. Can I get any more direct with that answer? It all begins with me partnering with the engineering group or the project management team that are going to put these projects together to lay out my expectations. And my expectation is I'm going to pick the consultant we know, so I have direct communication and it's unfiltered communication. And oh, by the way, we expect credit back from that design firm because they're not going to have to pay someone to do that job. I don't recommend that way to go. I can show you and share with you over the bar or anywhere else a horror story of when that was not done and how we failed the DEA inspection of opening a 50,000 square foot vault and how we weren't able to make a product delivery because the consultant didn't do it to the DEA spec that I knew the DEA wanted out of the area that oversighted us.
Yeah, and to Dave's question, I guess I would follow up with that is sometimes architects are bidding on projects and they come with their own team already because they bid that as a large RFP. Yep. Do you push back on that as well and vet the consultant, or and how do you look at that relationship? Should that consultant be beholden to you or the architect?
At the end of the day, I look at it, the consultant should be beholden to my company, right? That's the way I look at it. It's not me personally, it's just what's my company expect us to deliver. Yep. And they're going to go on to their next job, right? I'm looking for a consultant I could call tomorrow for the next job and the next job. And hey, by the way, we did it wrong. You know, hey, let's tweak it and get it better each job we do it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how I look at it.
Jim.
One of the things that you can do on your part, because we've all been in that boat, you right now are isolated, as Dave is saying, from that person like Mark or Jim. What you need to do is lay expectations with your architect that you need to have direct engagement with the end user of the systems you're going to be designing.
It's critical. Good point, Jim. Anybody else have any questions?
I have a question for Phil. On your, I assume this is a pre-construction meeting that you hand out this information, correct? I have had attorneys who deal with architecture that said there was a reason why you don't summarize stuff. And there are, let's put it this way, there's a danger in that. in that they read that as a spec, and it is not inclusive of everything that spec should be. So I think in those kinds of cases, in my world, I just duplicate the spec, their applicable plans, and hand it to them and say there'll be a test next week on it. No, but they have to have them. What is your impression on that? Are you placing liability on yourself when you brief the spec? And I've had engineers tell me the same thing. They don't want to put their specs on the drawings because it tacitly says these are the only things I'm looking for.
Nope, understood and agreed. We
Yeah.
don't actually abbreviate the spec. What we do is we go through and say, these are the areas we're going to be reviewing and why, and what our expectations are at each of these stages that you're going to have to do. When you reach the point of a pre-construction meeting, product has already been selected and purchased, vendor, integrators or ECs have already been brought on board. So a lot of the information in the spec has already been covered. You've already approved it. You've already approved product submittals and the like. This is now kickoff. This is now more about installation, process, programming, training. This is all of the things you're going to check as you go through the project from beginning to end. So it's not really an abbreviation of the spec, but you make a good point.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
Guys, I appreciate it. I was listening to what you were saying and thinking, yes. I was thinking about 10 different things that I'm dealing with on a daily basis that you all brought up. I'm a one-man shop, so sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think, am I the only person in the world that's dealing with this? Is this my descent into madness? And then somehow, after about 2 cups of tea, I break out and I pick up and I go back. I think that we all care about our clients. We all want to do the right thing. And it's really nice in this environment to hear it and have it reinforced, because now I feel like I can go back and go, okay, I'm not going to fire that client tomorrow when I get back to the house. I'll figure out a way to work with them. Or yes, I'll help the interior designer do one more 3D rendering so that the client can visualize what the thing's supposed to be, because they're too stupid to understand what we all know. And I'm not trying to be arrogant about it, but we spend so much time doing what we do, and then you deal with a client that can't even visualize anything in a big OAC meeting. Again, descend into madness. How far do you go before I have to really check myself, because sometimes I want to look at them and go, what are you, an idiot? Anyway, thank you. You're reconfirming that I can go back and do a good job, because you guys all confirmed that you're all doing the same thing. Thank you.
I think I want to speak to your comment around the client and being unfocused in meetings and not being able to visualize things. I think that from all of your perspectives, you have to understand that the client, this particular project that you might be working on, maybe 1/5, 1/10 of something that they might be working on. And so patience with the client is also really good. Don't let your frustrations get out.
So I have a note here. I wrote this down early. You are the buffer to my own madness, right? So we're codependent in this, right? And so you have to help me and go, hey, Mark, you're getting a little crazy here, right? And I'll even admit to you that my own people can't visualize what we're trying to create. So this is why we have to do this, right? But we're in it together, right? So you're the buffer to my own madness as well. So thank you very much.
Jim, one last comment?
However, there may be a time where you do need to fire your client.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
there are a couple of rules. Don't ask me to do anything unethical. I've got to look at my face in the mirror every day. Don't change the scope on me in midstream and not expect that's going to impact my scope of work. And if you start having the client who really you feel like you can't trust, that's a client you probably want to fire.
All right, everybody, thank you so much.